recording. Good morning, everybody. This is Chris Linenberger with the Texas Homeless Network. Welcome to 2016. So this morning we are looking at the fourth webinar series on the youth count in Texas. And sorry about that. I'm working out a couple last minute things. So working with the project and then working with schools and ethics, just so you know, we are scratching or actually postponing the ethics piece till the next webinar session, which will be next week. We have more than enough to talk about today. And so just so you know, all of you guys that are out there listening, all attendees are on listen-only mode. You are muted. That is because if we have everybody unmuted, we get a lot of feedback and nobody will be able to hear anything. So you are in listen-only mode. This webinar will last about an hour. We'll make sure we have plenty of time to get to your questions at the end of the webinar. Hopefully we can fit all that within our 1 hour time frame. And then in order to get to your questions, we'll need for you to submit questions. So during the process of the webinar series and the presentations, please go to your toolbox, and the third tab up from the bottom, it should be questions. You can click on that and you can type in a question. Craig Fierro is here with me monitoring the questions. We'll make sure we put those in some kind of order, and then at the end of the webinar, we will ask those questions to our presenters. Also below the questions piece, you will see that there is a handout section. So both handouts have been added in under handouts, yeah. And so what I've done is divided them up, and so it's a specific PowerPoint for each presentation. And then as well, so you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will be able to send it out at a later date, plus possibly put it up on our YouTube channel for other individuals to look at later. So the agenda for today, of course, we'll do introductions in just a second, and then we are going to go from there into looking at House Bill 679 and Phase 1, 2, and 3 of the project. And then from there into working with schools and school districts, followed up by a nice lengthy question and answer time for you guys to post and ask any questions. You will be able to post a question, and then we will follow up with you to make sure that that question was answered sufficiently so that you leave this webinar and have all the information that you need. So as far as introductions, as I said, my name is Chris Linenberger with Texas Homeless Network, one of the program development specialists. And we have Craig Fierro here as well, helping to coordinate this call. Our presenters for today, representing TDHCA, is Naomi Trejo and Jean Stamp with Theo. So I want to make sure we have sufficient time to have each one of these ladies talk to us about their piece of this this webinar. And so what I would like to do is go ahead and give we're going to go to Naomi's. So Naomi, I am going to you, and I'm unmuting you at this time.
All right, thank you very much, Chris. And thank you to the Homeless Network for this introduction and for hosting. We've been pleased to work with the Texas Homeless Network, the Texas Network of Youth Services, and the Texas Homeless Education Office throughout the creation of Youth Count Texas. And working together will give us a more accurate count and a better result. So we're pleased to be here. Craig, if you would move to the next slide. Oh, Chris, I'm sorry. Would you move to the next slide? Thank you. Craig is taking the questions. That's right.
I got it. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm not here by myself at TDHCA. Kate Taylor and Elizabeth Yevich from the Housing Resource Center are also with me. They might be joining in case they have something to add or if there's any questions. And myself, my name's Naomi Trejo, as Chris said, and I may have talked with a lot of you regarding Emergency Solutions Grants Program or the Homeless Housing and Services Program. And Kate and Elizabeth are with the Housing Resource Center, which is the Research and Information Division of TDHCA. We're working on Youth Count Texas together. Next slide, please. Kate, Elizabeth, and I will be providing an overview of House Bill 679, which requires TDHCA to collect data and needs assessment of homeless youth, describe how the information collected from Youth Count Texas will be used, give an overview of the history of the survey development, which occurred last summer, and explain reporting to state legislatures. Next slide, please. First, we will discuss House Bill 679, which passed in June of 2015. We plan on conducting Youth Count Texas in 3 phases listed above on the slide, and we will go into each of those phases in more detail in this webinar. Next slide. House Bill 679 by Representative Turner was signed into law on June 17, 2015. The bill also includes its own definition of homeless youth used for the study. The bill names TDHCA as the lead for this study, while also working in conjunction with the Texas Interagency Council for the Homeless. The due date for the study is December 1, 2016, so only 11 months away since it's already 2016. Next slide, please. The Tisch was created in 1995 and meets approximately 4 times a year on a quarterly basis. The Tisch has a wide array of state agency representation, including the Department of State Health Services, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, the Texas Department of Aging and Disability Services, the Texas Education Agency, the Department of Family Protective Services, the Health and Human Services Commission, the Texas Workforce Commission, Texas Juvenile Justice Department, and Texas Veterans Commission, the Texas Department of Assistive and Rehabilitative Services, TDHCA, and representatives of homeless service agencies appointed by the Governor, Lieutenant Governor, and Speaker of the House. We also have advisory members which can be nominated by Tisch members that will attend the meetings and also participate in subcommittees. Between meetings of the membership of the whole, the Tisch has several work groups and subcommittees that meet on certain topics. After June 2015, a new work group was created to provide guidance for Youth Count Texas. Already, the group has been involved in the development of the survey for Youth Count. Next slide, please. All right, down to the bill. HB 679 has its own definition of homeless youth. This definition is different than the McKinney-Vento Act or HUD's Continuum of Care or COC definition. So specific questions are needed in order to get accurate data. For example, for the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, a person is considered a youth at or under 24 years old. For the purposes of HB 679, a person is considered a youth under 19 years old. For this reason, the survey for Youth Count Texas asks for the birth date of the respondent so that the data collected can be used for both the point-in-time count or PIT survey and the HB 679 study. The bill also asks for youth living in an emergency shelter, abandoned in a hospital, and awaiting foster care placement. Some of the data points won't be able to be captured during Youth Count Texas. The TDHCA is working with the Department of Family Protective Services to collect this information. Parts 2 and 3 of HB 679 should be familiar to each COC since it is very similar to what is already in the COC interim rule, living in a place not designated for human habitation. Next slide, please. HB 679 requires data collection, so TDHCA has initiated Youth Count Texas. The count of homeless and unstably housed youth could occur at the same time as the point-in-time count, which you will all be gearing up for during the last 10 days of January, or it can be done at a different time than the point-in-time count if some communities want to gear up separately for another count of just youth. Let me say that again. So you can have the youth count at the same time as the point-in-time count, utilizing your volunteers to do 2 counts at once. That's the count for HUD and the count for House Bill 679 during the last 10 days of January when you normally do your PIT count. Or you could do a separate youth count at another time of year, most likely since it's already January, in February, which will specifically focus on youth and will not count all people experiencing homelessness to be submitted to HUD. And Chris, would you mind going back 1 slide, please? Thank you. There's one other thing I wanted to point out with the definition of homeless youth. It does say a youth is someone who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And we are interpreting that, and the bill author has provided guidance to us that this includes youth who are doubled up or unstably housed. We understand that the PIT count does not include youth who are doubled up, but HB 679 is including youth who are doubled up or unstably housed because of this language about lacking a fixed nighttime residence. We understand that counting youth who are unstably housed is a great challenge, since many of these youth do not consider themselves to be homeless. They want to blend in with their peers and often do blend in very well, so are not easily identifiable. Therefore, we have contracted with Tisch to provide technical assistance on how to include these youth. Chris, if you can go forward 2 more. And 1 more after that. Thank you. Studying homelessness and housing instability among youth is a large task. To make the task more manageable, TDHCA has divided the study into 3 phases. The bill was passed in June of 2015, and TDHCA knew we wanted to give the COCs an opportunity to expand the point-in-time count or PIT count to emphasize youth in order to meet the requirements of the bill. We released a request for proposal and contracted with the Texas Network of Youth Services, or Tisch, to develop a survey with community input. Phase 2 is the phase currently underway. It started in September and will be the busiest from now with the point-in-time counts through February with any separate youth counts. March will be reserved for data collection. We plan to include COC input in phase 3 when we analyze the data and develop a strategic plan to reduce youth homelessness in Texas as required by HB 679. So we hope that you will continue to be involved. It's not just January and February and that's it. We want your input into this. Next slide, please. During phase 1, TDHCA contracted with Tisch. You may know that a count of homeless youth called Youth Count 2.0 was conducted in Harris County in 2014. Tisch worked with the researcher of Youth Count 2.0, Dr. Theron Narendorf at the University of Houston, to develop a survey for Youth Count Texas and learn from their successes and challenges of Youth Count 2.0. Tisch held 3 roundtables, 1 at their conference in San Antonio, and 2 virtual roundtables to gather input on the proposed survey. Tisch analyzed the PIT count questions from almost all the COCs and made adjustments to better count youth. They reached out to each COC for a commitment to use the survey for the point-in-time count or for a separate youth count. There will There were 2 surveys developed, but the surveys do not have to be used in their entirety, and there are several key questions on the surveys that, when included, will gather the information needed for HB 679. And next slide, please. All right, phase 2. We again contracted with Tenoise for phase 2, and Tenoise has created training for the survey implementation for volunteers during the count and technical assistance for COCs. Part of the technical assistance is these webinars, which Tenoise partner, the Texas Homeless Network, is conducting. Tenoise had experimented with different forms of data collection and settled on sending the surveys to the University of Texas at Austin Child and Family Research Partnership to collect the data. Dr. Cynthia Osborne, who is an associate professor and director for the Center of Health and Social Policy at the LBJ, or Lyndon Baines Johnson School of Public Affairs. She will be overseeing the data collection process. Tenoise will also be evaluating the youth count implementation and providing a report on the overview of the count process. Next slide, please. Tenoise has gathered many partners for phase 2, since gathering the information, as we said, is a very large task, to say the least. As we mentioned, these webinars are part of a partnership with the Texas Homeless Network. The Texas Homeless Education Office is providing input in how school districts can participate, and Jean Stamp, the Executive Director of THEO, will be providing that information next on this webinar. Tenoise reached out to each COC lead agency during phase 1 survey development, and has been reaching out during phase 2, since we know that you are all experts on the ground and you have the local knowledge and connections to hold a successful count. The survey information will be sent to the University of Texas at Austin, which will input the data into a database for TDHCA to use in phase 3. No identifiable info from the youth will be transmitted or collected. Tenoise also presented Youth Count Texas at the Texas Conference on Ending Homelessness in October. So you might have seen some of this presentation there as well. Next slide, please. Tenoise has developed a toolkit to help COCs implement their own youth count or supplement the point-in-time count to include youth. The first youth count was conducted by the Ending Community Homelessness Organization, ECHO, and LifeWorks in Austin. The result of that count found 3 times more homeless youth as during the point-in-time count. The goal of Youth Count Texas is to gather more information on homeless or unstably housed youth than we ever have before. And I asked Chris during this slide, which, yes, you're right, is 17 for you, to go to the Tenoise website to specifically look at one part of the toolkit, and that is Section 3, Surveys and Count Implementation. So if you're curious as to what the final surveys look like after the community input of the summer, they're both posted here, the point-in-time count survey and youth count survey. You can take a look at them. Please note that sometimes COCs will choose to use only some of the questions listed on these surveys. So the best option is to contact the COC or for the COC to contact Tenoise to figure out which are the key questions that we need to fulfill House Bill 679. So if you're a school liaison, if you want to go ahead and look at the surveys but then contact your COC, if you're a COC and you're unfamiliar with the survey, go ahead and take a look at these and note that you should contact Tenoise for information on the key questions that need to be used. Thank you, Chris. If you could go back to the webinar. Thank you. All right, and next slide, please. Data analysis. So phase 3, after the youth count and point-in-time counts. We expect to have several layers of data analysis starting in the spring of 2016. The data gathered from Youth Count Texas will be analyzed along with data from the Texas Education Agency and their Public Education Information Management System, or PEIMS, data, and certain data points collected by the Department of Family and Protective Services. If your COC already collects PEIMS data from your local school district, please be aware that this data is already being shared between TDHCA and TEA and won't need to be submitted individually. Per HB 679, the study on homeless youth needs to examine the number and needs of homeless youth, the degree to which programs are meeting those needs, and funding sources that might be able to provide services to homeless youth. Next slide, please. Phase 3 will include the development of a strategic plan to reduce homelessness among youth as required by the bill. This strategic plan will include recommendations for changes in state law, and the report will be due to the Texas Legislature by December 1st, 2016. Again, during Phase 3, we may be reaching out for your input on this strategic plan. Next slide, please. TDHCA set up a website, youthcounttexas.org, and we will be keeping this website updated with COC contact information so that volunteers can reach you and all the COCs that are participating, along with any updates on the development of the strategic plan to reduce homelessness among youth. Right now, we also have news stories updated almost daily on youthcounttexas.org regarding youth who are unstably housed or homeless in Texas. So that's an interesting news feed to follow as well. If you'll continue, next slide, please. There's our contact information with one exception. Elizabeth Yevich is not at, correction, yes, she's not at Texas Veterans Commission, she's at TDHCA. So the last email address should say elizabeth.yevich@tdhca.texas.gov, or tdhca.state.tx.us, just like the other ones. And if you have any questions, go ahead and email us. And also, we do encourage you to look at the youthcounttexas.org, which might answer some of your questions. And Craig, did any questions come in?
No questions have come in yet, so that's a great reminder that if you have questions about the information that Naomi just gave, please go to your questions tab under your toolbar and type in your question, please.
Great, thank you, and that concludes our part of the webinar. We will stay online in case any questions do come in. And with that, thank you.
Great, thank you, Naomi. All right, let me advance. So our next presenter is Jean. Hold on, right? Jean Stamp with Theo, the Texas Homeless Education Office, the executive director. Jean, let me give control over to you and unmute you.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be talking to you this morning. We at Theo feel like this is a very important study. We were quite happy when this legislation was passed. Let me see if I can pull this up because I think I just lost the picture, Chris.
Oh, it's right. So yeah, if you're going to control it, we'll see what's on your screen. Or I can control the slides, however you'd like for me to do it.
Let me just see if I can get it back here. I think you better control it because it's not popping up. You know, we use Macs and sometimes they don't work well with other things.
All right, well, we're back on my screen, so just tell me when to advance the slides. You're ready to go.
Yeah, move forward, please. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about, everyone, is Youth Count Texas and school participation. Next slide. And we really want to reiterate how much collaboration this endeavor is taking. So as you can see from the list of entities on the screen, all of us on a state level are involved, but also the community homeless coalitions are the ones who are really running the survey and doing the counts. Those include a lot of community service providers who are part of those coalitions who will be working with students and doing the surveys. And it includes the schools in the local areas. Hopefully most of our school districts are involved with their local homeless coalitions and certainly with their service providers as needing to do that because of referrals to their communities. Next slide, Chris. So I just want to stress a little bit for those of you that are not familiar with PIMS, which is the Public Education Information Management System. And it is a system that all school districts input information identifying students as homeless and as unaccompanied. Every student is surveyed at the beginning of a school year when they enroll in school. That's new students as well as returning students. Any student that comes into a school district during the school year is also surveyed for their homeless unaccompanied youth status. And then, of course, many times we have students who become homeless during the school year. Those students sometimes are a little harder to identify. It may be a matter of a teacher overhearing, a counselor overhearing something that's going on to get them identified. But as they are identified, they are all put into the PIMS system. So that data is always there. It's a cumulative data. It's not a point-in-time data. So once these students are identified, they remain identified throughout the school year, regardless of how their housing situation changes. So besides the youth themselves, schools really are the voice for unaccompanied homeless youth educational needs. And this is why it's so very important that educators' voices be heard. It's very important that our educators are part of their local homeless coalitions so that those services, those needs can be addressed in their local communities. And the schools know their community services. And, you know, in larger school districts, many times you may have services in one area of the district where you don't have them in another area of the district. And of course, when we're working with suburban school districts and frequently rural school districts, those services may or may not exist at all at a place where students and families can reach them due to transportation considerations. So there's a lot of things to think about as our coalitions and our community service providers are interacting with school districts to involve them in doing the count and identification of what service needs are. We think this study is a very important step to understand the scope of unaccompanied homeless youth needs. I think as Naomi spoke about in the Harris County area, in trying to do a point-in-time count, it became readily apparent that the normal point-in-time count that's being done for homeless adults doesn't always work to identify and count homeless youth. And that's why in the Harris County area they went to a month-long survey research model, and that's why, again, when we're looking at youth homelessness, this particular study is going to be implemented in a different way, maybe alongside the point-in-time count, but in a little bit different way to make sure that we gather unaccompanied homeless youth information. So looking at not only the count, but their service needs and what the gaps are, the kinds of funding needed to fill those gaps, and also where those services will need to be located to actually reach those students that maybe aren't in inner city areas where services are a little richer than in suburbs or in rural areas. Next slide. Okay, so how can schools assist with the needs identification? Schools should already be working with unaccompanied homeless youth in identifying their needs and their ability to access existing services within their community. School staff are encouraged always ways to participate in their local homeless coalitions, thus providing that educator's perspective and voice at the table for those needs, for looking at where are the service gaps and where are the funding gaps in providing those services in those communities. And then school staff are encouraged to build relationships with their local service providers and homeless coalitions so that appropriate referrals can be made for those services, as well as the ability not only to coordinate those services locally, but to coordinate bringing services in where there are gaps and looking at where do we get funding as a community working together to fulfill some of those gaps. Next slide. Okay, so directly assisting in the count, what school staff can do is connect their local homeless coalition with their homeless coalitions to learn about how the count is going to be conducted in their community. I think Naomi mentioned that it may vary from community to community, who's taking the lead, who's going to be involved in it, and where those surveys will be conducted. So school staff will want to find that out for their local area themselves, and they can do that through their local homeless coalition. Schools can share information. As Naomi mentioned, the PEMS data will be shared between TEA and TDHCA. We always want to make sure as we're sharing data that we respect confidentiality, that we are mindful of FERPA requirements for confidentiality, and that no student identifier data is being shared. And again, Naomi mentioned that that will not happen. Schools can let students and caretakers know the importance of having an accurate count in order to identify the needs, the service gaps, and to assist in funding for the provision and putting the services in the correct locations in communities. So the school's voice and the student's voice in that is very important. Next slide, please. So how can schools make that information available? What schools might do is let students know where the survey is being conducted in their community. They could do this through providing PSAs in newsletters, in bulletins, announcements, general information that every student would get if they are concerned that specific students being pulled aside and given information would be an identifier that they wouldn't want to have happen. So just putting that information out there in general may be a very helpful thing for school districts. The survey is being administered by state, local homeless coalitions as well as by service providers, not THEO or TEA. So districts or campuses can make the local decision to refer unaccompanied homeless youth to local service providers in order to take the survey. So what you would really need to look at is who in your district or who on your campuses are the administrators that would make the decision about doing that referral for taking this survey, knowing how important it is that we do have youth taking that survey. And you know, they would need to have that information about where the survey would be taken and who's going to be administering it. Prior to making that decision, but knowing who's going to make that decision in your district or on your campuses is a very important piece. So again, in wrapping up, what I'd like to do is just reiterate how important we at THEO and at TEA believe that this survey is, that it will give us information not only about the scope, the number of students that we have in homeless, unaccompanied situations, but it's going to give us really good information about what kinds of services are available, which services are being utilized, which may not be, which services are located in areas that students are able to get to, which are not, and what communities need to do to bring in needed services, have them located in the appropriate place, and be able to tap local funding sources for their services. So I'll be happy to answer any questions about schools' participation in the survey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean. We don't have any questions still at this time. So as I mentioned before, our third presentation was going to be Jack Nowicki with T-Noise. He was not able to make it today. And so we will include information with an email that goes out, as well as hopefully get him on the next webinar that we will be doing next week. So if you have any questions at this time, please type them in now underneath the questions tab to the right of your on your toolbar. I'll give you guys just a couple of seconds.
Ask me to clarify if 19 in one day is too much.
Just one question. So Naomi, we know that, and I gotta take you. Okay. So the age is through 19, so that means that 19 years old plus 1 day is too much. We don't take that person. It has to be 18
actually,
and
it's under 18.
Under 18, okay.
It's under 19, so that means that it's younger than 19 years of age. So 19 is older, and older is too much. That's correct. That's why we ask for birth date, so that we can make that determination, so you don't have to keep track of it.
Gotcha. Just wanted to clarify.
Sure. And I also wanted to add to what Jean said about referrals, possible referrals made at the local level from school districts to areas where the survey will be taken. One thing that TNOIS has worked on, and that was also a best practice found in Youth Count 2.0, Harris County, was something called a magnet event. And this is an event. It can be like a fair or an overnight sleepover at a community center. They're called magnet events, which will attract youth of all ages, and but will also attract youth that might be interested in or eligible to be taking the survey. So TNOIS will have more information on what a magnet event is, but magnet events would be a very good way to gather information, since it is a best practice. But in terms of if schools want to put something, a PSA or a bulletin out, a magnet event might be a good advertisement in that regard.
Great. All right, we did have a couple of questions, and thanks for that clarification. We did have a couple of questions roll in. Let's see, this one is from Camille in El Paso. So one of our largest school districts is not wanting to share data. How can we remove this barrier?
So this is Jean. I would say there are a couple of things. The PIMS data is available through TEA, so the school district directly doesn't have to provide that. It can be provided from the state level. However, relationship, that's always the way to work better, to share information, is to make sure that you're building relationships with key people within the school district, where you can work on mutually important issues together. And certainly the sharing of information both ways about the needs of students and the need for particular services, etc., is a really important piece of information to be shared. So I would say identify who in the school district would be a key person for you to know. Certainly starting with the homeless coalition, or the homeless, the homeless liaison is a place to start. Every school district has a homeless liaison. So starting with that person within the school district and working through them might be a beginning to be able to get the kinds of cooperative, collaborative work that you need within your community.
Great. So, so the first step is really getting in contact with that school homeless liaison and working back from there.
Yes.
And I would like to add, this is Naomi. I would like to add also to what Jean said there. The relationship hopefully can be built year-round between the COC and the school, since it can be a main referral source for homeless services, and also, again, like Jean said, working on mutually beneficial issues. So not just for youth count, but year-round. partnership there.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, so a couple of comments. Just a reminder, so for any COCs that have not done so, please let TNOIS know if you're planning on participating in the Youth Count Texas project. And so we will, when we send out this, we'll send out information around this webinar to everybody that participated. So there'll be contact information on there for TNOIS. And then also, if, hold on one second, read this. So if there are any other barriers to participation in the youth count, then make sure when you let TNOIS know that you would, or if you're going to participate in the youth point in time, then, or the youth count, just make sure that you let TNOIS know, and then also if there are any barriers, or if you're experiencing any barriers, let them know about those as well. That would be a great discussion to have. Any other questions?
Chris, this is Jean. I just want to add for anybody out there who doesn't know that on our website we have a directory that lists all of the homeless liaisons in the school districts in the state, so that if anybody doesn't know who the homeless liaison is at their local school district, they can go on our website and under directory, and it's alphabetical, and be able to find who that person is for the district.
And what is your web address, Jean?
Check.
Yes, our web address is www.u, the letter U, the letter T, Dana, D-A-N-A, Centers, CENTER.org/Theo, T-H-E-O, standing for Texas Homeless Education Office.
All right, great. And we also include that in the chat bar as well. So the link is there.
Great.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I wanted to add, this is Naomi, that we are definitely encouraging all COCs to participate in Youth Count Texas. The more complete data, the better the study. And it could be something as easy as getting a special team during your point-in-time count that specifically is looking for youth hotspots. It could be possibly a different time of day. If you want to hold a magnet event, having that also at your point-in-time count. And that will also allow you to gather more information to submit to HUD as well for the point-in-time count data, which may, affect federal funding as well. So we're looking for multiple objectives here, and we're hoping for broad participation. TNOIS is there to help with this, and there is some stipends available that they had talked about in a previous webinar. So if you're still looking for, how to do this and, how you're going to pay for it, contact TNOIS and see what's still available with them. But again, we are looking for broad participation so we get a good, accurate count, even if you don't do a whole separate youth count at another time of year.
Great, thank you. And we do have one question just asked. The question is, how many total days do we have to collect survey info from homeless youth?
That's a good question. So it really depends on what your point-in-time count. So you have two options. One is with the point-in-time count, one is a separate youth count. Your youth count, if you do a separate youth count, can last as long as you want, as long as it ends at the end of February. So the data collection can happen in March. If you hold it with your point-in-time count, you can do an expanded time period over your point-in-time count to count youth. Not all of that can be submitted to HUD. It really depends on your point-in-time count model that your board has approved, your COC board has approved. Harris County went for an entire month. There's other organizations or COCs that are doing a week. Some are doing 3 days. It really depends on what will work best in your community. Again, I recommend looking at Tenoys and contacting Tenoys about getting that technical assistance, but we need the data starting in March.
Great. Awesome. So contact Tenoys around that. Need the data in March. All right. I think that is all the questions we have at this time. So I wanted to thank everybody for being on this call, and then I do have a little bit more information. So the toolkit, of course, is at tnoys.org/youth count toolkit. And also our next webinar will be Wednesday, January 13th at 10 a.m. So that's next Wednesday. And it'll be the last in the series. This next webinar will cover data collection, aggregation, reporting, and submission. And we are also looking at having possibly having Jack on there to talk about ethics as well. So this will be a little bit longer webinar. So we'll have a lot of ground to cover that day. So thank you. So finally, just thank you guys. Jean and Naomi, thank you for being here and presenting to us. And if you have any other questions, as we mentioned, when this email goes out regarding this webinar, you can feel free to respond any questions to either THN or Tnoys, and we will route you to the best person to answer your questions. So you guys have a great day, and this will be up on our YouTube channel shortly. I'm signing off now.